Welcome to the Be Unstoppable in the Zone podcast. My name's Lisa Clifford and I'm your host. Be Unstoppable for me is all about helping you unlock your incredible human potential and for you to access your mind in a way that it works for you. And that's why I became an empowerment and firewalking instructor, running events where people participate in a way that reveals to them who they truly are without a shadow of a doubt, and therefore enabling people, you, to live the life that you want without any limitation. So welcome, Anna, to this lovely conversation we're about to have, which is much needed. But before we begin, can you just share? I know you pretty well, but I still learn lots about you each time I speak to you. But can you just share with the viewers and the listeners who you are, what you do, and how you help people in your world?
Well, thank you, first of all, for having me. I think that who I am is someone who is capable of tapping into emotions of others, whether it's two-legged or four-legged or bewinged ones or whatever it is, and interpret it for them when that is needed. And so through that, I've come to train myself in different techniques to be able to offer a whole toolbox, if you will, of different methods and techniques, because everyone is unique and nobody functions the same. And especially when you go through something difficult, you know, we all have our way through it. So I have really made an effort to find different ways of meeting people, whether it is through ceremony, as in firewalking and sweat lodge and ceremonies like that, or smaller ceremonies, just being with the fire, or a one-on-one conversation. There are so many ways of going through, you know, these things that we have to deal with, all of us, through life. And so when it comes to grief, since I have met it several times in my life, and I found that every time was different. And I found that it hits you differently every time, but you're never prepared for it. That is why I wanted to dive deeper into that and see if there's any way I can support others going through similar things.
Well, let's dive into the subject of grief. What is grief?
To me, grief isn't caused by death. Grief is caused by love. Because the basis of grief is love. And there's a beautiful poem by a woman called Donna Ashworth it's called Love Came First. And that's exactly, for me, what grief actually is. Yeah. I think that's obviously you can put it in so many different words and you can say so many different things about it, but for me that is really the basis. The reason why we go through grief is love.
That is such a lovely way to put it. And so we're going to talk about grief a little bit just now. Why is it important that we're having this conversation, that we talk about grief and that we talk about it more than we currently might be doing? What is the value in talking about grief?
Well, it's different in every society, but I mean, I can see in the society that I live in Sweden, we don't talk about death and grief. We hide it away. And we hide our dead, we hide them away. We never see them. Many people don't even get to see their dead loved ones. It's not a thing that we have in Sweden. So that's one of the reasons for me, especially here in Sweden. But then also, I think the the state of the world at the moment, everything that we've been going through for the past 4 or 5 years, has heightened the attention, or the I don't want to say, well, sort of knowledge too, of course, about death and grieving. So I think we need to talk about it more. I think we need to. Sorry, yeah.
I was just going to say, sorry for cutting in. I was just going to say, what are the unintended consequences that happens to someone when they don't talk about their grief and it's bottled in and in your culture just hidden away? What kind of effect can that have on somebody that's unintended?
Well, I mean, I would say the most common one is a depression. And then, when someone is unable to get out of their grief, it becomes a state of being, a state of mind that then follows you everywhere, and it's so if you don't process it, if you don't go into it and look at it and face it, you risk living with a depression or an anxiety that is caused by all that. Like, goes for any unresolved emotion, really. If you do not look at it, grief will definitely do that. Grief will say, okay, I'll wait, and you can do whatever you need to do, and you can keep yourself busy, and I'll be there when you're done.
Yeah.
So there's no real, you really cannot. Maybe some people think they can, but you cannot really outrun it. No emotion, really. I would say.
And do you think in Sweden that's the culture then of, if it's not talked about, then it's almost considered that it doesn't exist, but really people are having to find their own way of managing it without the tools necessarily? Is that fair, or is that not the case?
I would say, obviously there are people who do talk about it, but when I look at the support groups that exist, for example, people who lost someone to suicide, there is no government help at all when it comes to that. There are all people who do it voluntarily, on a voluntary basis. They put together support groups, and you can go there, but so many people don't even know they exist. And so I think that goes for a lot of anything around death, really, because we've had this. It didn't used to be like this. It wasn't always like this. We had the viewing of the dead back in the days, way back, but not in my lifetime. Definitely not in my lifetime. And so it's I don't know. I think I cannot speak for everybody, obviously, and I cannot speak for all the different societies, but my experience, my personal experience, is definitely that. I've had unusual experiences because I've been able to be with both my parents when they died 30 years apart. And people go, really? You were there? And I said, yeah, we all were, all of the family would gather. And that's how we used to do it. And we stopped doing that because we put them away in old people's home, or we let them die in a hospital, and we just accept that the doctors say no one can be present. So we accept rules that aren't good for us.
Do you think there's a closure and a peace of mind in being there at the end compared to not, that makes it easier? I'm not saying it's easy to live with it, but is it easier to live with it when you're there at the end compared to not being there at the end?
Most definitely. Yes, absolutely. I would say so, because there is the visual confirmation, and also when you see a loved one pass away, you will, and I think everybody will agree, about, with this thing, the fact that you see that the body was just the shell, it was just holding the soul. And when the soul leaves, it is no longer that person. And that's an important part of accepting, it's an important part to see that when that happens. And no, it might not be for everybody, but I still think we need to talk about that more. We need to make death more accessible.
Yeah, and I guess it's the perspective that we see death with as well, isn't it? I mean, the most precious things in my life, and I've got family, the most precious, as not children, but sisters and father, and the most precious things in my life are my dogs. That they are with me, and I'm down to one, every moment that I can humanly have them with me. And I've had 4 retrievers. I've got one now. And for each one of them, I've been there insisted on being there at the end for their last breath. And lots of people have said to me, oh, I couldn't do that. I couldn't do that. And I put myself in their shoes as well. And I think, oh, for me, it felt such an honor. It felt such an honor to kiss their nose as they slipped into their next phase. I didn't feel like or see it as like a light going off. I saw it as a moving on to, and I know what beliefs are, we have beliefs so they soothe us, and I like my soothing belief that they move on to heaven and they go and play with the bunny rabbits. I like that idea. And so that's my perspective. So I didn't have that kind of really, I mean, I was brokenhearted without a doubt. And it's not just animals that I've lost. I've lost my mum, my uncles, my sister, my stepsister, my niece. I can't tell you the number of people that I've lost, but the souls that I've been for at the end have been my animals, and it just feels such a blessing. I've put myself into other people's shoes that think that they couldn't be there at the end. I think my mind would start playing out different ideas of what the end was like that is much more traumatizing than the reality of that gentle last breath and moving on. So do you think
that they've actually done research on that when it comes to putting your pet down, and the thing that the pet wants there is you?
Oh yeah.
It's and to me it's I don't want to be hard on anyone, but to me it's unbelievable that you would let anyone you love, if you have the choice, and you would let them die alone on a cold table at the vets. That's just a horrifying thought to me.
Yeah, well, I think it's actually harder to live with that as an experience, as well as the human, than it is the beautiful ending. But not all endings are beautiful, I have to say. But so yes, so just going back to then, the seeing somebody as they pass is actually easier to live with than not. So what do you think? Is there a higher death rate at the moment, or is it a different age group? What's the statistics at the moment?
Well, I just know the Swedish statistics, and it spiked in 2020, to no surprise, which I think it did in most countries. But then it actually went back down to what we had the previous years. So it doesn't seem to be that the death rate is going up. But obviously, we've all heard about all the completely, the healthy people just dropping dead all of a sudden, to a greater extent than we've ever had before. And I don't think it's so much a fact of how many deaths as it is how it is talked about and reported. Mm-hmm. And the fact that we have the whole world, we went through something that we've never, the whole human history have never gone through before, with the COVID.
Mm-hmm.
whether you want to call it a pandemic or not, but that was the first in history when we all of a sudden got involved in the whole world's problems of sickness and disease and dying, you know. And then as that was fading, we were, we had the war started in Ukraine. And so, and then after that, we have everything that's going on in Gaza now. So what in my experience at least, is that we have more information, and we get more information that we can deal with, and especially around death. And for all the societies that haven't had a very open attitude, if you want to call it that, towards death, I think it's inevitable that the fear of all of that, all of those topics, everything around it, rises. It comes up. So it needs to be addressed. It needs to be addressed, I think, in a greater way than we have so far.
What do you think happens to our nervous system with all of this information that's out there, that's more than we've ever had before? The war, the economy, the pandemic, we would put the news on for a whole year, and it would totally contain death numbers. So we were hearing death all the time. What do you think happens to us as our system sits in that environment of negativity? It's not to say it's not true news, who knows, but what happens to our system when we're immersed in that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it matters if it's true news or not. The fact is that we get exposed to it, and grief activates the same system in our body as stress does. So you have stress about anything going on in your life for different reasons. Then you have grief coming in. Maybe it's personal, maybe it's what's happening in the world, maybe it's to your, whatever it is. And the stress levels just keep going up. And we have, it's with the amount of information, that stress level keeps going up. And I find myself quite often telling people, turn the news off.
Yeah.
Give your system a break. Rest from all the information that will just pile stress on stress on stress for you.
Because it feels like we've lived it, doesn't it? When we hear it and then we visualize and even see pictures, we believe that if we don't follow, well, at the time, it's in our system that it was life and death if we went to the supermarket without a mask. Simple things suddenly became a threat on whether we lived or not. It was so severe. So that is still in our system, isn't it? So that's already in our system, in our cells, as a memory of an experience of where we were fear driven into isolation, even though many of us were perfectly healthy. We were locked in. And so I don't know that we've had a way of releasing that fear from our system. And so I'm guessing,
or at least we've never been told that we should. Nobody ever said that, considering everything that's going on, you might want to find a way to release, that stress that's building up. They don't even mention that. They just keep piling it on. And people are just sort of okay, they think they have to just accept it, and I have to deal with it, and well, everybody goes through the same thing, and nobody ever talks about everything that we have to deal with, and that you're just expected to do so.
And I guess that people are thinking, I hear people say such a lot to me, oh, well, what I'm going through is not as bad as what other people go through. And so many people compare their situation with others, but their system is going through its own experience that's on top of its other experiences, isn't it? And whether it's similar to somebody else or not makes no difference. It's not reassuring to our system at all that our situation is not as bad as someone else's, because we've all got different maps of the world. And I'm just thinking, so on top of the stress, and then people are going through the heartbreak of losing someone, what that must feel like in this particular time of history, if you like, or of our lives, that we've got a system that's overloaded with stress and finding a way of just getting through the day and being in survival mode. And then we have the inevitable in life of losing a loved one, how that must feel differently these days to how it felt 5 years ago. What do you think?
Well, again, I think because of all the stress that we accumulate and that we all the things that we are exposed to today in a way that, I mean, yes, the global knowledge, the knowledge of everything that's going on, that is new. And what we went through with the pandemic is also something new for the human race. But if I look back to when I was a kid, we had to deal with what was in our direct environment, not even 2 blocks away, basically. So all that information that keeps coming in, that we have to sort of relate to in one way or another, we are not trained or equipped to deal with it in a healthy way. And that's why we need tools for that.
Which is where you come in beautifully, really, because not only have you got the tools, and you've got lots of different tools to suit people's different styles and preferences and spaces that they're in at any one time, but you've gone through your own fair share of heartbreak and grief to be able to have some empathy, because I don't think any two people's feelings are the same, but it's not like you're sharing your expertise without having walked this path yourself. And so, I think that you have a very specific and beautiful way of holding someone as they're in the different stages of grief.
Yeah.
And can you share a couple, if not all, of the different stages of grief that people experience, so that they don't feel like in some way they're doing it wrong because it isn't yet feeling easier? Or maybe even they might be in the space of thinking, well, I don't feel any of the stages of grief, I've dealt with it, mainly because they've perhaps suppressed it.
Well, a lot of people will say that there are 5 stages, and then they will count them, and what I find is that they use the same stages they say about death as grief, and I don't quite agree with that. The ones that most of us know about when it comes to the 5 stages of death is the denial, the anger, the bargaining, the depression, and then the acceptance. And while many of those apply for grief, it's not quite, in my world and my experience, not quite like that. And so there are also some who talk about 4 stages of grief, which is shock and numbness. And of course, the denial and anger can go into that. But the shock then, of course, is also depending on how unexpected the death was. The size of the shock. Numbness, I think, for sure. But maybe if it's your beautiful, elderly, sickly mom, that passed away, then maybe the shock isn't that huge because it's not really unexpected. But the numbness, I think, for sure. And then the stage of yearning and searching, it's called, and which, of course, you understand. It's like when you go through this, really, you long for that. You long for that person. You're looking for them, or your dog, or your cat. God knows I've done that. And then you have the despair and the disorganization, and that's when things really fall apart. and there is chaos and you don't know how to cope. That's when your anxiety comes in and maybe depression comes in. And then you have the reorganization and the recovery. And that also, of course, what it says, you start figuring out and you start coming back to maybe not normal, because it's never going to be the normal like it was before, but a new normal. And for me, there is a fifth stage, though, which I've never heard anyone talk about. But it is when you are in a sense of freedom, happiness, even euphoria. And it to me, the first time I experienced it was so surprising and so almost I felt, I felt guilty, because you're not supposed to feel that. And for me, my interpretation was that I was tapping into the feeling of the one who left. And also there was this pureness about this stage, the pureness of just, it was bliss-like, And
I wonder how many
so
people
unexpected.
feel that, Anna. I've never heard of it. And so I wonder if anybody, no wonder it's not talked about, because I think that's the utopia of the outcome.
Well, I mean, and the interesting thing is these stages, and when you talk about the 5 stages of death, they are sort of almost always in the same order, starting with denial and ending with acceptance. But when it comes to the stages of grief, you can come in and out, and you can skip one and come back to it later, and you can go, and so they don't have a specific order. And you don't even, I mean, it's not like you have to go through all of them either. It is so personal and so different. But I think that if you at least know that they exist, then you are a little bit more prepared, and you have a better chance of navigating through this and processing all of it.
Awareness is so powerful. But just going to the freedom and bliss element, that I think that's the thing that's unique to you. I mean, if somebody can come to you at the denial stage, more likely to come to you in the chaos stage and the very disruptive, disorganized, chaotic stage, more likely to think, I need a way to get back on my feet here because this chaos is consuming me. I can see that you would be able to take them to that level of freedom and bliss, utopia, I would call that, which is a surprising, unexpected level of that I've not heard of. So I think that's the thing that you perhaps bring to the grief process is, you don't just have to get to acceptance.
No, and I think also
get to.
I mean, it's always tricky to have an expectation, of course, because as soon as you put an expectation, you're bound to fail, right? We know that. Yeah. But at the same time, for me, I think it was more liberating to just realize there's nothing wrong with me for feeling this way. I have the right to feel this way, even if I'm at the same time, in deep grief. But we spoke about the relief of grief, right? Do you remember the other day? And that was actually the relief of grief for me. That was like, this is also a part of it. This is also true, and whether it is me connecting to the one who left, or whether it's actually really me connecting to being completely peaceful with all the feelings that I have and all the hurt and all the pain, it's still a possibility. And like I said, you come and go in different times, and you go through different stages, and you skip some, and you go through some, and you don't go through some. And so it's so very individual. I think also, obviously, it's individual because of a lot of it has to do with whether you are used to dealing with big emotions or not, you know. And if you're not used to it, then it can be completely devastating to have all these very, very strong and painful feelings. But just to know that it is actually normal to have them, that it's actually normal to want to express them, and maybe through a session of just a primal relief session, for example, that we can do, where you really get to scream your lungs out, because it is that painful. It is that painful, and
And
you
it can
have
be
to be allowed to feel that.
absolutely. And that's the thing, be allowed to feel it, because lots of people say, oh, don't cry, don't worry, and it pushes it back down, and you kind of think, okay, I can't be this version of me in front of my friends, because then they wear it. But if they come to you, not only is that primal release a expression, but it's also a releasing, isn't it? So it's not just the voice that goes with the pain, it's actually the pain that is released during the expression, isn't it? Or a layer of it, or a letting go of a pressure cooker worth, or a little, just take the little, and then if they spend more time with you, I'm guessing that they can get where it becomes more familiar or more comfortable, maybe not comfortable, but maybe more familiar, just to release what's being held in, that's probably attached to more grief underneath it as well. So there's like a little collection of grief banks that
or at least definitely a collection of different feelings, you know, that are all supposed to be there because we're humans. So
yes.
you have these experiences whether you want it or not. We all do. And it's more a question of just accepting and saying, okay, I'll let myself go through this. It is all right. I can go through this. I can feel all of this. And also, you know, when if you have all these bottled up feelings, as long as you have them and trying to hold them in, that will be the pressure cooker, right? So finally you will explode if you don't decide to deal with them beforehand. You will explode, and then it might even get worse, because then how do you handle it, and who was at the receiving end? So it's just, the way I see it is, as long as you have all of those feelings bottled up, it's going to be really hard for you to express anything in a way that anyone else can understand it, and maybe even yourself. So it is a good idea to release that first, because then you can start talking, you can start explaining, you can start being okay with your emotions, and you can co-live with them instead of being repressed by them.
When we were talking the other day about the grief can be associated with lots of other things, as well as the death of somebody physically passing over, but it can be a change in a relationship. I mean, an adjustment even with a sibling, or an ending of a marriage, or being made redundant, or starting a new job. We can experience the feelings of grief to so many different changes in life, because we're kind of grieving an old phase or an old sense of belonging, aren't we? And so I'm guessing the same process of chatting to you and releasing to you, or being heard by you, or you giving people a good listening to, can support people in lots of different areas.
Definitely. I mean, I would add also just having to move from somewhere that you really, really love to live, which was something I had to do just a couple of years ago. And it was so hard. That was truly, leaving that place was really meant grief for me. So there are, and like everything, a relationship or a work, or, you know, so many ways and so many reasons to feel grief.
Well, even Simon Sinek, I was watching a little video that Simon Sinek was saying, and he's um, the guru who talks about find your why. For those that don't know, when he talks about when somebody ghosts you, it can feel like the description that you've just given of the shock, the denial, the bargaining, I think you said, and the chaos and the uh, disorganization and disruption. When somebody ghosts you, which is the modern way that people have the ability to turn their back and move on with their lives or move away or whatever they're doing, he says people have the experience of grief to being ghosted, and he says it's such an unfair thing to do to somebody because they actually don't know if you're dead, but their mind goes on a journey of experiencing the death of you. So even technology can create, or the lack of technology can create, a grief cycle.
Not just technology. I mean, I've actually had that experience a couple of times in my life when someone that I thought was that was a really, really close friend of mine just stopped interacting, stopped communicating. And a similar feeling of grief, of loss for sure. And you don't have an explanation. And it's devastating. And it's really hard to let that go and just say, okay, I'll have to be fine with that, because you do not get an explanation. And if you're like me, as soon as I get an explanation, I'm fine. I can move on, But if I don't get one, I'll have to do that work myself. And
yes, and the mind doesn't stop.
No.
The mind doesn't stop thinking, is it this? Is it that? Was it this? Was it that? It's on a constant data search for what feels like it could be. And it's out of our control, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah,
the mind,
especially, I mean, you try and you reach out and you text and you mail and you call and you try all these different ways that technology has given us today, and you still get no answer. So you have to deal with it yourself.
I think everybody listening to this will have experienced that, even if it's somebody that's just forgotten to reply. Yeah. I'm of an age, if I don't reply immediately, I'll forget that I even read the message. Completely forget. It's like it's not even searchable. But so I'm feeling that people listening and watching now might be thinking, well, if I'm feeling any of these feelings that sound like it could be grief, and it might be grief over being ghosted or over an old job or moving house or death of a loved one, or even someone that is currently, dying, the grief can start before somebody's even passed over, can't it?
Absolutely.
If they were, how would they go about working with you, and what sorts of things would you do with them? What does that look like?
Well, actually, that's when I work with the 5 stages of death, with the relatives, or if there's a person about to die, know that they're about to die, long-term cancer or something. It's you work with the 5 stages of death, and you also talk about how would you like your death to be, and who do you want present? It's up to you to decide who should be there in the room, or do you want to be alone? That's also one thing that we hardly ever talk about in the modern society. How would I like to die if I can choose? If it's not an accident, or very sudden, then I can actually choose how I want to die. Not only what happens with my organs afterwards, but who's supposed to be there? Who do I want there in the room? Do I want music? Do I want some incense that I like? So we talk about that a lot. And then, of course, the family around it, the family and friends around it that have to deal with it too. What were you like? How would you prefer? How would you see it? So there's a lot of things that you can work out beforehand.
That is such a... Stop talking for a second. Pause. Because that is such a good question for us to ask ourselves now.
Yes.
Whilst we're healthy even. Because the last thing I want, if I'm in my hospital bed, is someone chatting. I would like them to hold my hand, light a pomegranate candle, I don't want music in the background. It does my head in. I can't have too many different noises. I don't want doors slamming. I want them to make sure the nurses are not bustling. They come in quietly and gently, do what they need to do, and leave quietly. And whoever's with me, I don't want a lot of chatter. I mainly want to be told how pretty I look.
It's interesting, though, that you see yourself dying in a hospital.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? And I think that is, but do you know, I think that is a lovely thing for people to think about now and even just write it down or talk to their bestie about it or their partner about if it's in any of these situations, or if I'm in a coma, for example, you know, something's happened outside my control, I'm in a coma. I don't like people giving me a load of detail unless I'm asking for it at the best of times. So somebody thinking that talking to me is going to help me come back round isn't.
Yeah, that's another thing. Do you want to be revived?
Yeah.
You know, do you want that? It's really important questions that we never ask. You know, that we for some reason, I don't know. It sometimes it reminds me of the fact that when I work with couples, and there are issues in the bedroom, and I find that they know everything about, you know, the favorite color, the favorite car, the favorite football team, or whatever, food or whatever, but they don't know the favorite things to do in bed, which is to me baffling, you know, because that's like one of the basic stuff of a relationship, at least in my word. So this is a similar thing. It's like we talk about the organs. Yes, that's a, you know, do you want to donate your organs? That's like everybody's heard about that. But we don't talk about how would I like to leave? What would I like it to be? You know, like we just said. And that's also baffling when you think about it. We've started talking about, like, you know, when you give birth, you have more of a choice if you want. Although today, at least in Sweden, you have to battle, you know, to say, I want to give birth at home, for example. But so at the beginning of life, we have quite a few options. The end of life, nobody's talking about it. We need to start doing that.
That is, so I think, right, not that you need this from me, but I think you could do a workshop on people contemplating how, you know, we do a vision for life, but a vision for that transition over that bridge or whatever we call it. It's kind of reassuring. I'm feeling a little bit of reassurance that I didn't know my little soul needed by just saying, yeah, I don't want somebody chatting. I want pomegranate candle, and I don't want the nurses thinking I don't know, they're bustling in and around. I think that's a good idea. I'll look forward to seeing that get posted. And so it sounds to me like you can help people before they're passing over. You can help their loved ones as well in understanding their feelings and understanding how they want to feel as their loved one is passing over. And then there's a period when we've lost someone and they've passed over. And then there's also the ending of different scenarios in our life, new job, new location, old relationship finishing. So there's those kind of endings. So you can help people with those. So do people come to you, or can you do this on Zoom?
Both. I can do it live, or I can do it online. Maybe not all the sessions that I offer are practical to do online. Some of them you would prefer to, you know, be live in the same room.
Yeah.
But quite a few of them I do online. Yes.
And so what would the first step be? So if somebody's listening to this now and thinking, I want to know a little bit more, I don't want to dive straight in yet, what would the first step be for them?
Well, the first step is always, we have a short talk, you know, maybe a 20-minute, where the person gets a feeling of who I am and how I work, because obviously not every therapist works for everybody. So you have to feel that this feels comfortable, this feels safe. And so and that obviously is free of charge. And then we have the next step, that is a bit of a what was it you said? Chemistry and what was it you said the other day? I thought that was so brilliant.
Chemistry fit, and then
chemistry and diagnosis.
Yeah.
Yes. And I think that is the next step for me to start looking at or start listening, obviously, to what is happening, and to look into what kind of tools would work for you now. Mm-hmm. And then I might have an idea, you might not like it, we'll talk about it. It's not me who decides what methods we use. I will present them to you, and you will say that feels like a good idea. But I would say, if it feels a little bit scary, then it's probably a good thing to do. You know?
Yeah. How often do we hear that? I'm scared that I probably should do this. It's probably going to be good for me.
Yeah. And then, of course, it might change, over the process of you healing. You might want to try different ways of approaching it, and different ways of expressing yourself, and different ways of seeing yourself. So we keep talking about that. And just to whatever works for you is what is good. That's what I would say.
And knowing you as I do, what runs through everything that you do is non-judgment, acceptance, love, and just holding the space for somebody is so powerful anyway. Even before
I actually had the most beautiful, I'm sorry to interrupt, but you made me think of something. I had the most beautiful compliment from the husband of one of my oldest friends, because they came to me when their relationship was really, really rocky, and he said it was amazing because you did not take sides, and you didn't judge. And I thought, wow, and I thought that's true. That's actually how it works for me, because there are no sides. There are just experiences,
Yeah. And that's lovely, because if you're coming with your grief to you, the last thing somebody wants to be feeling is that you've got another program going in your mind of how they should be dealing with it, which you don't have. You're just completely accepting of, you meet people where they are, is I think the way to explain it. And you are completely accepting of everything that they're going through, and also picking your timing as to when is the right time to help ease them into another phase or soothe that, because sometimes people might not want to be soothed yet, but they still want you to listen whilst they're in the phase they're in. They might not want to move through that phase, might they might actually just feel like they need to be in the pain a bit longer, and I'm guessing that you're okay to hold them in that space, even if it doesn't mean there's a different outcome at the end. There's no checklist on your part.
No, there's no checklist. There is the art of seeing when, or feeling more than seeing, maybe, because it's easy to get stuck in an expression, and it's easy to get stuck in anger. For example, anger is one of the most seductive emotions that we have, because it's so strong and it keeps us vibrant, right? And it's easy to get stuck in anger. And as much as it is fascinating, and sometimes even, like I said, gives you a feeling of strength, it's also not good for you to stay in that too long. So there's a fine balance of listening and letting you process what you need to process, and then also hearing that now you've actually come to the end of this and you need to move forward, because you will get stuck in your sadness, in your tears, in your anger. That will become a permanent way of being for you if you're not aware. So it's also my job to point that out to you. I will never force you to leave any state that you don't want to leave, but I will make it clear to you that this is where I can see you now. And I think it is a good idea that you try something different. You can come back to it, but let's try something different. So there's always that balance, of not letting them get stuck, basically.
Yeah, because it can so easily become a habit and part of their character.
Yeah.
That suddenly their character has this anger to them that they could have, if they were in the right hands, work through. So that's gorgeous. So I know that you have, if people want it, a free download on some of the conversations we've just had about grief, but also you've got a Zoom seminar coming up, haven't you? Can you remind us of the date for that?
Yes, I am doing a webinar about this on the topic of grief in April 17th. And
not to put you on the spot, but it is the 17th.
Yes. And what my idea here is for me to have an introduction and also to talk about these different stages, but I also want to give the chance for people to ask questions and for us to have a conversation that can be beneficial for everybody who's listening, because we all go through it differently, but we also have a lot in common, and just listening to others who are going through a similar thing is so healing. So part of it is also going to be that.
Beautiful, lovely. So for anybody that's listening, watching today, Anna, do you have I'm putting you on the spot now because I know one size doesn't fit all, but do you have one thought, one bit of wisdom that they could maybe just go away and treasure until they get to meet you in person or come on the Zoom, which we'll put in the link? Is there one?
Well, on the topic of grief, I would say there is no way to do it wrong.
Just be.
Well, yeah, just that nobody can tell you how you are supposed to grieve. No one can say when you're supposed to be done, in what order you're supposed to do things. Grief is your personal experience, and you have the right to do it your way.
Well, thank you so much. I'll make sure that everybody has your email address so they can get the little download and also the link for the free webinar session on the 17th of April. So for now, thank you so much, Anna. It's been fascinating. A joy to chat to you. Lots of love.
Thank you, darling.